Hello and happy Tuesday, everyone. In celebration of Justin Trudeau's resignation as Prime Minister, I'd like to tell you about a method I've been experimenting with that I'm calling scissor splicing. Its purpose is to connect branch-to-branch connections between mature adult trees that are grafting compatible. Because the connections are made between nascent buds, the hypothesis is that they will be stronger in the long term, building layer after layer of wood over a aligned set of heartwood. The application for scissor splicing that I'm interested in is to use it to make frames for living structures, things like gazebos and garden sheds and perhaps habitable dwellings if you do enough work to incorporate plumbing and electrical. But that is beyond the scope of this video. In order to make a frame like this, you need any cluster of trees as long as you have at least 3, and you can connect those points branch to branch and make a series of arches that connect a complete shared perimeter. The height of the branches determines the top of the walls that you're going to make. And you can finish the structure by incorporating a floor and a roof and walls in the gaps between all of the existing trees. The really important thing, and the main benefit of this technique, in my opinion, is that the apexes of all of the trees involved are preserved. So they'll continue growing and put out new branches that can then be spliced into a new floor. So do this on a species of tree that can grow very tall. Imagine, for example, doing this with coastal redwoods. You could get hundreds of feet of height and make literally a skyscraper with living trees, given enough time and generations of input. Because these connections are made between nascent branching points, it is expected and hypothesized that they will become stronger over time than traditional stem-to-stem type grafting methods, as you might see in Ferdinand Ludwig's Baubotanique methods, for example. In this method, you take a branch and another branch, you remove bark on a short strip from each branch, and you hold them together with grafting tape or parafilm. This creates a shared cambium as the bark of the two trees then fuses together and starts adding wood layers onto this splice over time. The issue is that once this splice is created, the heartwoods are not actually connected, and there is a natural point of shear for the structure to break. In addition, because a tip-to-tip connection creates an aligned heartwood, all wood that grows on top of it over time is also aligned. And because the structures are nascent, it should be as minimal in terms of misalignment or cracking or voids that might result from the grafting process. Of course, you need to use sterile tools so that you don't introduce microbes and fungus that might break down that branch connection over time. Of course, with young nascent tissue, they're well supplied with sap, they're well supplied with everything that they need to fight infections, and they're expected, in my opinion, to be more resilient than older material for grafting. Conveniently, there are some little shrubs that I've got permission to work on. I need the branches for scissor splicing, so I'm going to do the splices first and then do the pruning after. So if I make a mistake, there's still plenty of material to work with. Okay, so you start by removing the bark in the little crotch of this V. It helps to get two branches that are perpendicular to one another. So rotate it 90 degrees relative to one another. This one is nice because it's pointing down when it rests naturally. And this one is sort of with the plane. You can't really see it in the frame right now. There it is. So then this is the splicing tape I use. It's called parafilm. It's actually a research material that I have learned about through my time as a microbiologist. I did order it online, and it's not from any lab that I worked at. If anybody watching this is a former professor of mine, do not worry, he's going to pinch it from you. Okay, so now that that's done, we're going to do the pruning, removing any excess branches that we haven't spliced or that we want to grow out laterally from the structure. Hopefully removing all of the other branches will direct all of the tree's growth energy into the branches that are still spliced together. It's very important in the scissor splice that we've got two shoots coming out either end of both sides of the connection, because you need both shoots to continue to grow in order to stay alive, in order to add new material to that junction. If one of them dies, it'll die back to the last phytomere, the last place where a new leaf has formed. And if that's between your knuckle and the tip of your finger, if this is a branch, right? There's a leaf here, and you cut it here, that whole branch dies back. And what you're left with is something that wants to heal as if this isn't here. So something, pardon the rude gesture, but something that wants to heal into this configuration, which won't hold an angle without the potential to slip out. So you need both legs on both of them in order for them to scissor properly. Okay, so now we've got this set up, I want to tell you about some limitations you might have when you try to do this at home. So the first limitation I think of is being wind. So these scissor splices, when there are connections between trees, if you've got high winds, they can amplify if they're in exactly the right rhythm and lead to what's called a positive feedback loop, where the motion gets larger and larger and larger, like skipping a jump rope, until eventually it accelerates beyond the point that the actual splice can handle, and it breaks the splice apart. This only happens if the wind is relatively strong. It's much worse if the trees are a lot bigger. One way you could potentially address this is by adding a reinforcement like a bamboo pole. Reinforcement does add extra weight, which is why I suggest using bamboo. It's very light. The other issue with this technique is time. Once grafts are formed, the sources I found online suggest that it takes 6 months to a year for them to really heal together, to the point where you can remove the tape and let them grow as they will. And depending on the species of tree, the time of year, and the weather, all of the growth characteristics can change. So the amount of time that it takes for the splice to reach a thickness and a level of strength that's necessary for your particular build is going to vary. And so further study is needed on that front as well. And that brings me nicely to the final issue with this method, which I see as being availability of the shoots necessary for splicing and grafting. So in a lot of these collections of trees, wherever you happen to be working, whether it's your land, whether it's somebody you're working for, there's always circumstance to take into account. So you need trees that are compatible for grafting. That's a whole separate topic, but there are many very smart people who've covered that topic in extensive detail elsewhere on YouTube. I'll include some links if you're curious to learn more about splicing compatibility down in the description. Suffice to say, there are limitations when it comes to which trees and bushes you can actually splice to one another. There is also the limitation that you need an extensive overgrowth. You want as many branches potentially touching or coming close to touching as possible, so you have options. I've encountered many situations, even on these little shrubs, where it should be super easy, and there's tons of opportunities where I take 2 branches that look like they're just about touching, and I try to get them into position to verify that I can, without a great deal of tension, hold them together. And it just doesn't work. Maybe there is a side branch further down that gets in the way and creates some tension that prevents them from fully connecting. And so sometimes I'll remove that branch higher up, and that removes the tension and they come together. Sometimes just for whatever reason, the structure or the geometry makes it really difficult to maneuver them in place and then hold them there. Remember, the whole splice is being held together by parafilm over 2 very nascent buds right at a branching point. So it's not a very strong structure that's holding it together. It's all held together in tension. So there's a little bit of tension, and the less tension you have, the better. And so that's why you want a lot of options, so you can find which one is the best out of, say, 10 potential options, and then do your pruning. I see that limitation of opportunity and where opportunities for splicing exist as being the greatest weakness of this method. Ironically, I also see it as the greatest strength of this method, because you're relying just on what's been provided to you by nature in the place that you're working. So you put all of your energy up front into a small area, and then that redirects the growth of a very large organism, potentially a whole enormous tree that could last for thousands of years, and you're just directing its energy over the long term into the future. So relative to the overall output and impact, it's very easy. I'm not sure if this technique is genuinely completely unique. I'm sure someone has thought of it before. Maybe a lot of someones have thought of it before. Maybe it's really big in Mexico. If it is, please let me know in the comments section down below. I am most active in the spring and fall. I see those as the best time to do splicing and tree work, but if you live in the greater Vancouver area and you have trees or shrubs that you want worked on, I will do this work for you for free while I experiment and learn more and refine this technique. So reach out to me in the comments. If you would like to support my work while I learn, or you just like my writing and art making, which I usually do in the winter and summer months, feel free to support me on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Thank you to my long-term supporter on there, Sasha. Remember, it is always Tuesday.